Do you ever have this kind of problem where you've got one key, another set of keys, another set of keys, and you've got them sitting all over the counter or hanging up or not enough hooks? If you do, watch through this video. I'm going to show you a really cool project that I found online that you can easily build in your own shop. And all you really need to do this is a couple of clamps and a table saw. Make sure to stay tuned all the way to the end of the video and do me a favor and like the video. When you like this video, it actually helps YouTube share it with so many other people. This is such a simple project to build and a really cool project to build that it'd be great for everybody to be able to do it. Also, make sure you stay tuned until the end because I've done a little something with this project that I don't do with every project. And if you don't have one, you don't have to do it either. It's completely optional. But I thought it was really cool and it made it really, really unique. So make sure you stay tuned into the end to see that. So for this project, we're going to be using some maple and walnut that I've got here that's 1 inch thick. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over to our miter saw and we're going to measure this out at 10 inches. Because we've got to laminate some maple together, we're going to do this at 10 inches and then we're going to put it side by side. Now, each of these maple pieces is about a 3.5 inch width, or at least that's the goal for the finished product. So we're going to be laminating two of these pieces together. Now, before we do this, after we've got it cut down to length, we've got to rip off and clean the edges. So right now it's being ripped down to the final dimension of 3.5 inches. And the reason for that is because we want to make sure we've got a nice square, nice clean edge. So that way, when we join these pieces together, it's going to be a nice tight seam. So now that we've got these pieces all ripped down, the next thing we've got to do is put them in some clamps, and we're going to spread some glue along here, and we're going to let this lamination dry. We don't have to worry about doing biscuit joining or anything like that. It's not a lot of weight, so we just want to get enough clamping pressure on here to join these together. Now, in addition to the two clamps that I've got here, I've put a board across the top as well, because as soon as we apply the pressure to this, sometimes these boards will want to bow up. So I'm putting these clamps in place to make sure that they stay flat with just a piece of maple going across the top to hold the seam. And then we're going to end up throwing a clamp over top of it as well on the opposite side. So we got it clamped in both directions. So while our maple is drying, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of walnut here, and I've just cut the edge off of the board, but we're going to square up the edges on this to make sure that they're nice and square. And because we're going to be inserting walnut strips in between the maple to give it a little bit of character, we're going to cut down some walnut strips at 1/4 inch. So what I'm doing right now is I'm measuring it for the inside dimension to also include the blade width. So that way on the outside of the blade, we're going to have exactly 1/4 inch strips. And we're going to do this about 4 times. So that way we've got a bunch of them that we can put in between these maple seams. So as we go, the important part to remember about this is you have to take into account 1/8 inch for the blade thickness. So I'm adjusting my fence as we go to make sure that I've always got a 1/4 inch on the outside of this piece. So, and then once we've got that in place, we're then going to have all 4 pieces done. And as soon as our lamination is dry, then we can look at adding these pieces in once we cut that up. So now that this piece is dry, taking it out of the clamps here, and what I'm doing is I'm putting a line mark every 1.5 inches. And the reason for that is we are going to take this piece and we're going to cut it at every 1.5 inches on center on the table saw. So the way that I've got it measured right now, I've started with having the inside at 1.5 inches, but I've taken away a 1/16 inch off of that in order to account for the saw blade. So that way we're actually at 1 7/16 inch. That way the 1.5 inch mark is directly in the center of this blade. So now the important part about this, because these pieces, we want to make sure the grain stays consistent. So once we've got all of our pieces cut, you want to line them up. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to put some numbers in from 1 to 5. So that way I know exactly what order they're going to go into. So even though we're going to put walnut in between these seams, we want to make sure that this grain's going to line up. So now that our pieces are all cut, the next thing that we need to do is start adding some glue to our seams. So all I'm doing with this is putting the glue on the seam. I'm just spreading it with my finger, but if you've got a silicone brush or something like that that you want to spread it around with, you can. We just need to make sure that we've got enough glue, maybe to get a little bit of squeeze out, but we don't need to put too much on there. Now, one thing to remember with this is, so we're putting all of these walnut pieces in between the maple, but we still want the maple grain to line up as much as possible. So we're going to set all of our pieces in here. And then once we've got this done, we're going to make some slight adjustments to make sure that that grain is lining up on either side of the walnut pieces that we're putting in here. So that way it looks fairly consistent with just that little bit of a walnut accent, which is actually going to look really cool. And so again, very similar to the last pieces here. So we're gonna get this clamped in, and we're not going to use a ton of pressure because we really don't need to. We just need to make sure that those joints are closed. So these pipe clamps that I've got, they're going to work really really good for this. But the other thing that we're going to do is we're also going to add a clamp over on the top side. So that way it's got pressure in both directions, which should actually help to keep it straight. Okay, I'm going to show you all something really quick. If you didn't see it already, I'm going to show it to you so that way you know. If you look here, one of the things you may have noticed as I was running through this through the table saw is it was actually starting to tear it a little bit. So that's likely indicating one of two things. Either my saw blade needs to be cleaned, which is likely what it is, or it may need to be sharpened as well because it should not be causing that tear out, especially with it being a heavy industrial blade. I had this sharpened about 6 months ago. However, I've been using it a lot since. So, no doubt that it probably needs it. So now that this is all dried, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put an 80 grit sandpaper on the sander and run that through just to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Now I cheated a little bit here and I'm using the bandsaw to cut this off, but you can do this with a handsaw too. It's very, very easy to do. Now that that's done, the next thing we're going to do is we want to make sure to square our edges off. So just using my miter gauge, I'm just running this through the table saw just to make sure that we've got a nice square piece on all sides. Reason for this is because we don't do this, it's not going to look very symmetrical. It's not going to look very good. So we want to make sure that it's going to be nice and clean. Now, other note is that I did change the blade when I did this to a sharper one. Once that's done, we're going to run this past the sander just really quickly. And this sander here I love because it sands it at a perfect 90-degree angle. So we're going to run every edge over so that way in the event that there's any saw marks, we're going to get rid of those. Now that chunk you just saw me use, that's for cleaning sandpaper. So if you don't have one, I highly suggest that you get one of those. So just like in a lot of my other videos, I tend to put a lot of chamfered edges on things. I like the symmetrical look of it. So we're going to do the exact same thing here, putting on a chamfered edge that may only be about 1/8 of an inch. So it's not a lot because we don't want to lose a lot of the surface, but we want it to be enough just to give it a little bit of character. So once we've got that done, we're going to take this over to the sander. And again, another reason why I absolutely love this sander is because I can tilt the table down to a 45-degree angle that matches the chamfer bit. And I can actually do a little bit of sanding on these chamfered edges. So again, you can do this by hand if you want to. You don't have to use this tool. I use the tool simply because I have it. But if you don't worry about it. Now, another note to this is there's that positive stop there to hold it. That stop does come in handy, but I'm going to move it out of the way so that way I can actually run this board along the edge a little bit in order to make sure that I get it cleaned up really, really well. And there was only a couple of small burn marks from the router. That's because I held it on a spot a little bit too long where I had started. So just sanding those off lightly. And we're going to make sure to clean that sandpaper also to make sure that we get a nice clean sand. So now we're going to start getting into the fun stuff of cutting these angles to hold this in. So I've got my depth gauge here, and because this is a 1-inch thick material, I've set the depth of the blade to about 3/4 of an inch. That way it's going to leave a 1/4 inch of material. Now, what I'm doing is I'm lining up the saw here with the edge of the walnut because we're going to cut through that walnut in order to create these slots. Now, if you wanted to set up the measurements on this, if you recall, we cut our maple pieces at just under 1.5 inches, and the walnut is a 1/4 inch thick. So you can actually set these up at just under 1 3/4 inches and you'd be able to get the slots. Now, what you do see here is that I'm actually running these through again on this one slot. And the reason for that is I'm trying to make the slot a little bit wider so that way not only will it hold keys, but it'll also handle carabiners. But with that said, I don't want to lose the amount of walnut that's sitting there either. So I'm going to be cutting it up a little bit more. Now, one thing to be aware of, and this may vary or may not be an issue for your saw, but my riving knife doesn't always like to stay straight when I put it on an angle. So you see that I have to kind of push it there. Not always the safest thing to do. So be very careful if that's something that you need to do. Alternatively, having the riving knife perfectly lined up is ideal if you have the ability to do that. On my rigid table saw, it doesn't always work out that way. This saw is actually known for those issues. So once that's done, we're going to sand these slots a little bit. We're going to do it by hand because it's very difficult to get anything else in there. And then once we've got all of that done by hand, we're going to use some of this mesh sandpaper from Diablo. It's a 320 grit. Then we're going to stick this pad on. We're going to put the mesh sandpaper on. And we're going to run this over because the idea is that we really want to smooth out the surface of this before we move on to our next step. And this mesh sandpaper, I can't say enough good things about it. It's almost like polishing. It just comes out that good. So if you haven't tried these mesh sanding nets, I highly suggest that you give these things a try. All right, so what we're going to do next, and if you've watched my channel, you've seen me use this before, but we're going to do a laser engraving on this project. Now, I had a Creality 10-watt laser engraver before. Creality reached out to me and was nice enough to send me this 22-watt Falcon 2 Pro version. And this thing is just night and day in comparison to the one that I used to have. And I'm going to show you how this works and what we're going to be able to do with this project as far as putting a little engraving on it, something to make it a little bit unique. Now, the nice part with this laser engraver is we put our project in there and then we can slide this down. The nice part about that is it's going to make sure that we're not exposed to any of the laser at all. But as you can see, it's actually lit up on the inside and it's got ventilation built right into it. In addition to that, it also has an air compressor that directly routes right into it. So it is a really cool machine and it's actually very powerful. So if you've never used one before, this is actually a very user-friendly machine. And there's a couple of different softwares that you can use for this, but the software that I use is called Lightburn. And I'm going to show you what we can do with this and one of the reasons why this is the machine that you want to get. And I am going to leave a link to this machine in the video description below. So be sure to check that out on Creality's website. It's also got some very good safety features. It has a key over here that turns it on and off. It has an emergency stop switch and it has a full power off switch. So it's got a lot of safety features built in. So if you're worried about using this around kids or whatnot, with those safety features and taking a key out, you won't have to worry about any of that. So let's have a look at a little bit of the software for it. So if you look at the software here, this is a program called Lightburn. And if you look in the bottom corner here, I've got you can see my old Creality 10-watt there, and then I've got the Pro 22-watt right now in here. The really nice part about this laser engraver is up here, there is a little camera icon. And this camera icon, if you click it, what it actually shows me is a picture of the project that's inside the laser engraver. So right in the top here, there's actually a camera which is connected to the computer through USB, as well as this, the engraver itself being connected through USB. So it's really, really handy. And here's what we can do with this. I'm going to click a font over here, and I'm going to click right here, and we're going to call this keys. And that's it. And that's what we're going to look at laser engraving. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag this right over top of where we want it to go. And you do your best with this. You try and center it as much as you possibly can. Now, here's the other nice part about this. Once we've got this in here, the other thing we can do is we can click this button that says frame. If we click this button, then what it does is it shows you exactly where that print is going to happen. So we're going to do that again, and we're going to have a look here. And so the nice part about this, if you click the frame button, but you also hold shift at the same time, it's going to emit a very light laser beam. And that is going to give you a really good idea as to if you are centered or not. So we're actually almost directly centered. So that's a really good thing. Next, what we'll need to do is we'll need to determine how much power and how much speed, because power and speed is what makes this engrave. And so I've done a little test piece here on a piece of maple, which is what we used for this project anyways. And on this test piece, we basically look at this and we can pick the shade that we like the most. So I'm preferable to this one here. So in light burn, I'm going to go to my speed setting, and I'm going to change my speed setting to 5571. That is 5,571 millimeters per meter. That is right here. That's where I'm getting that from. Now, I like this color as well. So we're going to set it at 87.1% power. And once we've got that set, we're now ready to engrave. So let's press start on this thing. Now, you can do this before you add your finish, or you can do this after you add your finish. Or you don't even have to do this step at all. But if you have a laser engraver, I highly suggest doing this because it makes it look really cool and really unique. If you don't have a laser engraver and you have the ability to get one, they do cost a little bit of money. This Creality Falcon 2, this one is absolutely amazing. Hands down, I couldn't say enough good things about it. So let's get this started and let's see how it goes. So I've sped up this video a little bit because I'm not going to have you watch the entire thing here. But in the end, it didn't actually take that long. Okay, so now that this is done, let's have a look and see what it looks like. So we're going to press this home button. That's going to get our laser out of the way. Once that's homed, we're going to lift this up a little bit, and you can see there's or you may not be able to see it, but there's a bunch of smoke here. So you'd want to give it a minute for that to cool. Afterwards, so we open this all the way up, and let's pull this out. And look at that. That is really cool. Now, don't worry about this little bit of overburn here because we're going to sand that right off. We can sand it off because this is engraved almost, I would say, a 32nd to a 16th of an inch in depth. So we're going to do a light sanding over top of this. But just look at that thing. Like, that is really cool. So just taking this back over, and we're sanding this again with that 320 grit mesh paper. Now, for the finish to this, I'm going to use some of this tried and true original oil finish. This stuff is really good. It hardens. It's nice, and it's easy to apply. We've already brushed our project off completely, so we're going to take just a shop rag. Something like this is good. We're going to dip a little bit, and then we're just going to be lightly rubbing a coat on. Doesn't have to be heavy. I don't think we want it to be. We're going to be wiping it off afterwards, but we're going to try to get it into all these different nooks here, and let's see how this goes. So it was a little bit difficult getting the finish into the slots that we cut out. So using a sponge for this is a really great idea. So after watching these steps, you can see that like this project is very easy to make. And overall, I've got this finished now, and it's just turned out really nice. And the nice part is, so you can, when you're hanging up your keys on this, you can do it a couple of different ways. You can take one key and you can put it in like that, and it'll actually support all the other keys on there. I made some of these slots a little bit wider so that way I could shove a carabiner in too. So it's entirely up to you. So if you liked this video, do me a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with other people. If you think that somebody else could benefit from building this project, it's amazing. You can use just a small amount of materials, table saw and some clamps, a nice finish on it. And if you have a laser engraver, I highly suggest doing something like this. If you don't have a laser engraver, that's no problem at all. You can certainly get one if you want to, or you don't even need it. You don't even have to engrave up here. You could paint something on if you want, or you don't have to put anything. It's entirely up to you. That's the beautiful part about this project. Either way, the laser engraver just adds a little extra touch. So I'll have a link to this laser engraver down in the description below. But also do me a favor and let me know what you think about this project. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what your thoughts are, or maybe what kind of spin you might put on this project. It's actually a really easy one to build, and you can do it with so many different materials in so many different ways.